Good morning. Hope you are having a great day. Okay. Have you been to any session here like that doesn't talk about AI? I would be surprised. Right? Okay. Yeah. So we'll take a slightly a different angle today. Like when we think about enterprises today, they just don't want AI. What they really want is AI with integrity. So without integrity and trust, AI becomes a liability. It's a risk, which generally not thought about. So today, what we are going to talk about is the landscape of AI. Okay, in terms of how does it look like, the aspects of automation, and the angle of like knowledge graphs and how they contribute and impact artificial intelligence. As well as we are going to talk about the missing layer, the trust in AI. Okay. And we call it as a decision trust infrastructure or AI trust infrastructure. And there is a whole discipline around it. It's not AI, it's agentic AI. It's called integrity first AI. And that's what we are going to touch upon as a part of this discussion today. I am your host, Chiru Bhavansikar, Chief AI Officer of Arhasi AI, the founder of TrustHouse.ai. I'm recognized as one of the top 10 Chief AI Officers of the year 2025 and 2026 by MSN. And I have like two handsome gentlemen here and very talented gentlemen.
Very nice.
Andreas Kollegger is the Director of Applied AI at Neo4j, a gold standard for like graph databases. And Rahul Kulkarni, like the Field Chief Technology Officer from Amazon Web Services. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
To get started, there is a lot of discussion about automation, right? Everyone talks about it. In the past, 5-6 years ago, going back, I was very familiar with something called as RPA, robotic process automation. And I hear that the landscape of RPA has almost disappeared or like completely changed by the coming of AI. Would you like to talk more about that, Rahul?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chiru. And if I look at RPA itself, right, RPA is more about automation. What customers are looking for is process reimagination. And in my role at AWS, I'm helping consulting companies reimagine business processes through agentic AI. Now, RPA does a good job with respect to basic automation, but we're moving towards agentic AI. And if I look at the agentic AI loop, it's all about perception, planning, reasoning, and action, right? This is the loop. And we're not looking just for automation, but we're also looking at decision making. And this is where AI makes a big difference. Given the right context, given the right set of tools and governance, you have AI that can actually act on your behalf and not just stream data or fetch data for you, which is what RPA typically does, but also act on your behalf. And that is the primary difference that I'm seeing between RPA and AI for business process transformation.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that. Andreas, knowledge graphs is a talk of the town, right? And I hear that knowledge graph connects data in a way traditional systems don't. Would you like to talk more about what knowledge graphs are, and that would be helpful for the audience here?
Yeah, and I'd love to actually follow on from your answer there, because a good way to think about knowledge graphs is like when we take agents that we're building today and we're going to do some automation with them, and they have an agentic loop that they go through that you talked about. They exist within a context. Like we start fundamentally by saying, okay, hey, dear agent, here's your role. You're going to be doing an HR process, let's say, right? Fantastic. And here's your goal, is to onboard new employees, let's say. Fantastic. Just giving them a role and a goal and then maybe some tools isn't enough for them to make decisions, which is what you touched upon, right? What they need is the same thing that we as humans already have, is a full context around the job that they're doing. What is the company that they're working within? What are the compliance regulations from a government standpoint that the company has to comply with? And then for this particular situation, what is relevant to this particular employee in this particular department that they're doing, right? So it's multiple layers of context, all that are interconnected, in the sense of being what we call a context graph that helps an agent do its, achieve its goal with the role that it's been given, but within the context that it needs to operate within. This is part of the guardrails that we end up setting up, right?
Cool, cool. Although there is a lot of talk about automation and agents and X, Y, and Z when it comes to AI space, there are certain challenges in terms of how customers are adopting it.
Yep.
What are the common bottlenecks or challenges that are brought to you by customers?
So the first thing is, if I look at just the automation or reimagination of a business process, the most important challenge that I'm seeing is you don't have documentation of the existing process itself, the context that you talked about, right? You have standard operating procedures which are there, but these standard operating procedures are never up to date. They're always, you always have, the information stored in muscle memory, in people itself, right? So that is one of the biggest challenges. How do you reimagine the process? Starts with discovery of your existing process. That's one. Second is, while we are thinking about agentic reimagination, what are the agentic patterns that work for this process? And the last thing is, how do you ensure that you have auditability? How do you have compliance, right? To ensure that the decisions made by the agent has to be accounted to the person running this process itself. Because a computer cannot have accountability. How do you have accountability attached to this business process or the decision made is the three challenges that I see with respect to this automation.
Got it, got it. I think that speaks to it again, like there is a aspect of auditability, governance, compliance, and how do those things actually layer across AI is a significant piece that I keep hearing all the time as well.
Yeah.
Andreas, when it comes to knowledge graphs, how do they really correlate or relate to AI, or how do they impact AI? Because sometimes it's seen more like a database. So I think if we could speak to that, that would be of great help.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think initially the right way to think about a knowledge graph is that it is a database, okay? But it's a special kind of database. And the graph part of it, of course, is what is really interesting. So in a classic database, a relational database that we're all here familiar with, you could ask it a question like, how many people are in this audience? Fantastic. But how do I know Rahul? Or how do the three of us know each other? And who do we know in the audience? And maybe who's going to recommend us for a job or something if we're interviewing? These end up being very natural kind of working your network things that we do as humans. That's the kind of thing you can represent in a graph as well. Not just the individual things, but how those things are related to each other. Then you can ask questions about that, just like, okay, who's most likely to introduce me to AWS? Well, probably this guy, right? I know that on a human level, but now we can write queries for that as well. And it turns out, as we were talking about all these processes and the decision making, we can take all of those kind of fuzzy piles of data that are in our heads and actually make them represented in a knowledge graph instead. So now you can see all of the processes, you can see all the decisions, all the causality between the decisions, the regulations that they're referencing to, and all those things. Now that becomes something that you can actually touch and actually work with and reason about as people, but then also because it's now in a data structure that we can make available to AI, the AI can do its job as well. And if I can say one more aspect of that there's a lovely quality to a knowledge graph that because it links the ideas together, like I know you, in the same way that I just said that sentence is very natural to say. It is also a data structure that I just described. And so the natural language abilities of an LLM map really nicely to a knowledge graph. Because of course the L's are language, a large language model. And so language translates into a knowledge graph very nicely because the surface of the knowledge graph looks like natural language to an LLM.
Cool. Yeah. I know AWS has a lot of services and products, right? When it comes to AI landscape, there is Bedrock, there is Quick Suite and Quick Automate.
Correct.
So if you could give a a high-level summary of how these relate to solving business problems.
Absolutely.
Right? For customers, I think that would be a good angle that you could hit on.
Absolutely. So at AWS, we fundamentally believe in the philosophy of letting builders be builders. We don't want to constrain anyone with one specific model because when you have the freedom to experiment, you have the choice, that's when you can actually build special things. So if I look at our entire AI stack, right, there are three specific layers. So starting off at the bottom layer, which is the infrastructure layer. Now everyone's heard of NVIDIA and GPUs, but we also offer our own custom chips. And recently we signed a $50 billion deal with Anthropic, where Anthropic's going to be using our chips to train their new frontier models. So that's at the bottom layer. So you have choice baked in from the bottom layer. At the middle layer is where we have Bedrock, right? So Bedrock is, again, offering choice. There's not just one model. You have a selection of models. If you want to use Anthropic, you can use Anthropic. If you want to use Noah, which is our custom-built models, you can definitely use that. And what is orchestrating all of this is the top layer. These are the applications that business users would like to use. Because a business user would like to have a low-code, no-code environment to build and their business process of sorts. So that's where Quick Automate comes in. Quick Automate uses the underlying layers, Bedrock, as well as all the chips that I talked about. It is vertically integrated, but makes it easy for a business user to just go ahead and create an automation. But what's important is the auditability aspect of it, right? AWS, we believe security is job zero. We want to make sure that customers have trust. Every decision that your business process automation is taking is logged as an immutable log so that you can verify, why did my agent take this action? And that is one of the most important things about trust. When you have clear explainability and knowledge about why the agent made that decision, it makes it easier. So that's the entire stack from
Right.
your standpoint.
Can I just say, like in my engineering heart, I love what you're just describing because having a fully integrated top to bottom stack all the way down to the metal is so valuable. Like you can either like piece together things as you are, and if there's engineers in the crowd, okay, sometimes you want to just do that. You love to get down there.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to get a job done, just knowing like all of these things are taken care of all the way from the top, like, okay, here's what the app is going to look like, all the way down to the bare metal in one system is fantastic. So thank you for the work you guys are doing. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
Andreas, like when it comes to AI, I hear that context is more important than models because models are getting commoditized. I mean, like there are differences, but like when you think about like differences between the models that exist today, like almost like there is a close to parity. I wouldn't say parity, but close to parity. So when people talk about context is important, how does it translate in the world of like knowledge graphs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a lot of deeper questions there about like how much can AI do by itself? Like at some point, is everything going to just be AI, or do we still have other parts of even just the stack? I guess, and like in the context of context, what that ends up meaning, and I think we all recognize this, that like it's amazing at how generally powerful and smart AI is these days. The frontier models are just absolutely fantastic. Really broad knowledge about the world, kind of deep knowledge in different areas as well. But if you talk with them about your specific area of expertise, you start to see the edges of where they might get things wrong, right? Yep. Like the hallucinations only happen, they happen all the time, obviously, of course, but you don't know that they're hallucinating when you ask them about something that you don't already know about, right? Like, okay, that seems like a reasonable answer to whatever I asked. I don't know about quantum physics, so whatever Claude tells me, I'm going to assume is correct. Even if with references, to be honest, I'm not going to read the references. But if you ask them about your area of special expertise, you'll quickly see the limits that they actually have, right? And that boundary of specialization is continuing to be there, right? And that crosses over from inside of the neural networks world knowledge down to special knowledge within an area, down to particular data that is real time in your enterprise. And that's the context part of all this, is that your enterprise always has actual information that the LLMs will never have access to. Even if you train your own models, they'll have general knowledge about your business, but not specific knowledge about like what's happening right now. So we have to do what we all know is like context engineering these days, and context engineering's entire job is to stitch together for the particular thing the AI is being asked to do now, because we know they're a goldfish, So, okay, they've forgotten whatever we just did. We're going to tell them for the next step of what you need to do, what you need to know between the local environment all the way to the global environment that's going to affect, really it comes down to the decision points is the most important. They can do some things without too much context, but as soon as it gets to like, hey, should I extend a credit line to a customer, that's a bit more important. The context is a bit more important. You have to get that right so that you actually stay within good guardrails.
Cool. Yeah. And Rahul, what are the common use cases where you see that AI is creating significant impact that are brought to you, right? Like, I mean, something that doesn't take years to actually showcase productivity or improvement or an impact.
Yeah. So broadly at AWS, we are seeing customers adopt AI in 3 specific areas, right? So one is improving productivity itself. So this is where we have the quick suite and your co-pilots of the world, right? The second is, I would say, business process. And the third one is innovation and research. Now, within business process, claims processing is being one of the most popular use cases for us where agentic AI is being used. That's because you have the ability to distill, context into the right databases so that you can pick the information. You can basically reimagine the process as well as have humans in the loop. Because at this point of time, if you look at autonomy itself, with increased autonomy, there's a lot more risk. And there are strategies to actually, limit that risk. One of the ways is to actually have a human in the loop. So the human is making the decision, but in addition to that, the AI is making the decision, but you have the human verifying it as well. So this is one of those things that I'm seeing in the industry. Yeah.
Right, and you could be seeing probably a different world of use cases, right? Like, would you like to talk about that?
I mean, I'll say that it's a lot of the same of what you're describing there, that obviously I would say probably the cutting edge of uses of AI is certainly in coding. Like, there's no industry that's doing, or no area of human effort right now that is more impacted than just creating software. That's the leading edge, for sure. And then on the practical side, I think your points are spot on. And like some of the surprising to us use cases are like high value use cases like compliance, where compliance is a big human effort right now. But when you look at compliance and regulations, it is a lot of text you've got to process. Okay, so that's natural language processing. LLMs are good for that. But it's not arbitrary text. It's not war and peace. It's laws and rules that must be followed. Those are actually things. They're not just interesting, prose, right? So actually extracting meaning out of that in a reliable way and cross-referencing them, because you'll have a paragraph of some compliance over here that references another one. And like for us, it's surprising that like we see companies that internal compliance teams lean on something like a knowledge graph, take the external compliance regulations that they have, their internal processes, turn all that into semi-structured data so that you can correlate across within the regulations to your internal business processes, stitch all that stuff together so you can do things like impact analysis, like when some bit of regulation changes, you can find out all the other regulation that affects all the way down to your business process, then all the way into like the actual teams that have to be notified, get a little email saying, hey, you now need to change something about what you're doing. And now it's back to the humans to make decisions about how to react, right? But you're giving them enough information, complete information just stitched together in an automated fashion.
Yep.
Which ends up being somewhat of like what you described as well. It's like providing the human enough context to make the right decision, because it's really their call.
Absolutely. And if I look at AWS itself, we have invested a lot of engineering time in building automated reasoning checks, right? So there are guardrails, and I'm sure many of you have heard about guardrails, so which basically help you detect PII within a specific text and block harmful content. But in a business process, you really want to check if the answer given by the LLM is backed by policy. If it is not, it's not a blocked or unblocked issue, right? So whether it is backed by policy, and the reason quoting which specific section of the policy is used, is enforced, is available to you. And if I look at the typical process, you'll take a compliance document, you'll have logicians convert your compliance document into logic that can be verified, right? Now, we have trained custom models that will take your business process or compliance document, convert that into logic that you can enforce when the LLM actually makes a response. So this is something that I would love for all of you to explore as well. Yeah.
Nice. Actually, I heard this word called intelligent security because the threat landscape, when you introduce AI, actually is wider compared to like traditional sense. As a result, a traditional cybersecurity model may not be effective enough to protect models. So this word called intelligence security was thrown at me, and that was like very encouraging. So
Yeah.
okay, cool. And on a different note, like there is also this concern that AI would displace workers, right? And don't know how true that is, but like would you like to speak about that, Rahul?
No, at AWS we believe that in the short-term future we'll have 1 billion agents running on us, right, and everywhere, but they're going to make human workers superhuman, right? It's not about moving jobs or any of those things. You'll still have people doing the stuff which is more important, right? The undifferentiated heavy lifting is going to be taken care by agents, and that's the way I see the future going forward.
Got it. And how about you,
Yeah,
Andreas?
I mean, I agree 100%. Like, for sure, like, we know that agents are going to, we've graduated from chatbots to now agents. We're going to have multi-agents, distributed multi-agents. We're going to have an entire enterprise of like thousands of agents running on AWS, preferably, right?
Yep.
And yet, along that way, I absolutely agree with you. Never, like, in history of humanity has like some productivity gain happened, and humans haven't found more things to do.
Yep.
Like, all of us here in the audience probably have a backlog of things that we're not doing right now while we're sitting here. We're like, okay, there's only a growing backlog. The backlog never shrinks, it only ever grows, right? So AI is going to help us get through more of that. And if we do get through that, we're going to come up with more things we can now do that are interesting built on top of that. That is almost the nature of humanity, is to like, okay, what can we do next? There will always be a next in every job, in every function, in every enterprise.
Yep.
So I don't think it will change perhaps jobs for sure, but is it going to replace jobs? No, we're only going to get more things that we can do, and so that we then will do.
Yep.
Right. I mean, when Google search came, I remember like I was very young back then, but I heard this discussion like, what would happen to the world, like considering like you have access to information from search, right? And there was concern about the similar concerns were raised back then. And like today, we take it for granted, like same for .com. And with AI as well, I believe like it's the same thing. I mean it's going to create like a lot more opportunities than like what it would displace. And considering like knowledge graphs, they actually provide context to the AI, and then like automation basically executes actions, literally bringing intelligence. Do you believe that there is a missing trust layer that is required, which overlays the whole entire AI landscape and provides visibility into that?
Absolutely. I was in a roundtable just the last week. We had the London summit, and I met a bunch of CTOs, and the CTOs told that all the large language models, the capabilities that are there at this point of time is great. We don't need another model which is better, right? This is good enough.
Yeah.
What is missing is context and the ability to have trust, so that I don't have to sit in front of my compliance team explaining why this happened. So this is one of the need of the hour, if you ask me.
How about you, Andreas? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with this. And like, to some degree, like this is like just the latest iteration of digitalization, right? Like we've been going through one piece at a time, making whatever businesses we have digitalized and like taking advantage of computing, taking advantage of the internet, and now like automation through AI is a thing. But along the way, we're almost, this is like, maybe I would say the digital twin aspect of this. If you fully realize a digital twin, it isn't just a representation of an enterprise, but like it scales all the way to like, okay, can we represent the entire world aspirationally looking forward? We can now see a path towards that,
Yes.
right? It is now feasible. We just haven't done the work. But now in that digital world that maybe spans the entire globe, so we have a global perspective, regional perspectives, all the way down to like what you individually are doing, that is possible. We know how to do that. It just hasn't been done. But along the way, we have to replicate not just the representation of the digital twin, but all of the processes, all the actions, all the guidelines that we have as norms, as laws, as regulations, that has to be replicated in the digital twin as well. So that when the agents are behaving within that, they're not just, it's not the Wild West, to use a US term. Hope that translates here. But that it is actually happening in a way that mirrors our understanding of how things should happen, that is a true reflection of the world, not just a simulation of it. It is our world that we are actually interacting with the agents, along with the agents side by side, that we know what they're doing, why they're doing it, the same way that we know within a large organization why a given employee is doing what they're doing. We just have to replicate all of that in the digital space.
Nice, yeah. One of the leaders told me this. Chiru, I don't mind moving fast with AI, but if I bring AI into my enterprise and it goes rogue by any chance, my job is at stake.
Exactly.
Right, and I think that supports this argument here, why we need the trust layer. Because it's not just about bringing AI into the organization. Like I myself, am I confident enough to protect myself that it's not just because I brought AI into the enterprise, it doesn't become my liability, right? How do we address that, right? And coming back to you, Rahul, how did you end up at AWS? And can you share a little bit about your background and history, your passion for technology?
Yeah, so I've been with AWS 8 years, and in my role, I've traveled 3 continents. I've always liked technology. I started off as a machine learning engineer. I did a lot of deep learning courses. I got a chance to work with our retail side of machine learning as well, right, where we are actually building recommendation systems. And then AWS came about, where I thought, okay, it'll be great to work with customers to really understand their issues and build services based on what their requirements are. So we truly believe in customer obsession at AWS and Amazon. We work back from all those things. We don't create services or technology for the sake of creating technology. We want to actually solve a problem. So I'd love to chat with you if you have any issues, any feedback. We'd love to take that. Yeah.
How about you, Andreas? Your passion for technology and the passion for graphs.
Yeah, so my graph journey, I guess I would say, started quite a while ago, about 15 years ago. Before joining Neo4j, I was doing medical informatics, nonprofit work around the world. And I had what I now would describe as my graph epiphany, the work that I was doing for disease surveillance, for medical informatics. I realized what I wanted was a graph, and that we were trying to use all these other tools as if they were graphs, and they weren't. And I realized, okay, that technology does not exist. And so I was motivated to actually help create this technology. Neo4j happened to be a small open source project out of Sweden. I found out about it, loved it, and thought, okay, you know what? This is exactly what I would want to use. And to use the social good aspect of this here, I was still driven by the mission of if this technology exists, all the things I was trying to do with it would be better. The world would be a better place if this technology existed. So I actually switched from just doing international nonprofit work to joining Neo4j when they decided to become a business. I joined as employee 10. I built our original development tools, designed some parts of the query language. We have our own graph query language. Some aspects of it are a little bit like SQL, and then it's extended with this idea of pattern matching. And then built out the data model, again, built out some visualization, kept building and building and building because I'm a builder at heart. And along that way, the entire thing was still driven by this mission of if we can make this technology available, lots of things I was trying to do earlier in my career would now be possible. And I will say, for AI, for Neo4j, we're a graph database up until AI. If you had a graph problem, you would use a graph database. Fantastic. But a graph problem was a smaller part of the overall thing. I needed it. I was motivated to it. That's fine. But now with AI, it turns out that so many of the things that are happening within AI, that the kind of the flexibility of the data model, I would say, when you take arbitrary, bodies of text, you've got millions of PDFs or something. You're going to want to turn that into semi-structured data and do work with it. You could try to come up with a relational schema for that, but then you don't know what the data actually has until you start to look at it, right? So you want a schema that almost evolves as you're pulling in the data. You can do that with a graph. So all of these kind of AI processing workloads and then analysis workloads end up being really great for graph processing. And so what used to be a very small part of the data landscape within AI, context graphs, knowledge graphs, all these things, graphs are now a broader part of just getting anything done. So it's been an amazing journey for me, going from all I wanted to do is just solve a problem that I didn't have a solution for. Now I've built the solution, and now it's opened up, now there's more things that it can be applied towards.
So just following on that, for anyone starting like AI journey here, like, could you suggest like a kind of a roadmap, like crawl, walk, run kind of a model?
Oh, that's a really great question. And I think if folks haven't already started to experiment with AI, I think it is worth remembering that even like the cutting edge of what people are doing today at like OpenAI or at Anthropic, like inside of their own labs, fundamentally is the same thing we were doing when we started a few years ago. The models are still basically natural language processing. They're doing some predictive, analysis, kind of, right? You can just think they're predicting the next token, fine. And like on the engineering side, it is still basically prompt engineering. We're just trying to figure out what bit of text we're going to send across the wire, and that the model has no idea other than that bit of text about what to do. That prompt engineering is still the right place to start, and so just by starting with chatting with a model, like if you interact with Claude or ChatGPT or any of the other models today, just formalizing what you're doing. So if you find yourself repeating things, okay, save that. And if you extend that into specializations, okay, save those things too. And then you realize actually what you're doing is like you've suddenly gone from like, okay, I'm just chatting, to now you've built what now ends up being effectively the harness, we would say these days, the harness engineering. You've now described a context and a bunch of information that the AI needs to actually get a job done. You will have transitioned from just chatting with the AI. Now you are now an AI engineer just by taking that process. You can then go deeper, of course. You can actually still go into software, do more elaborate systems distributed, but like that's a kind of follow-on step. To get started today, it still just starts with chat, because fundamentally, even the most complex AI engineering systems are prompt engineering-based systems.
Yep.
With more elaboration, right?
Absolutely. And I feel, there's no better time in this world to be a builder.
Yeah.
And one advice that I have for you is to fall in love with the problem, not the solution, because the solution's going to change, right? Pick one domain, or think about your lives, what problem that you want to you solve, and you have tools available at your fingertips to make it happen. So it's no better time to be a builder. Get started, go build today is my advice to all of you.
Cool. I heard this phrase, like I don't know how true this is, but in the next 3 years, there cannot be a significant AI deployment without trust. How do you view that statement?
So yes, those customers who have actually deployed AI in production, and there are many of them, they've had a very good trust layer. They've had trust boundaries created. They have the right permissions and roles and auditability. So without, I completely agree. You can't go to production without having a well-defined trust layer. And the people who understand that trust layer, both of them are equally important.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. People who understand that as well, right now, how important that is. And a lot of the times I heard that when people think about trust, they say security.
Yeah.
Right? It's way beyond security. A security, compliance, auditability are like a checkbox sometimes, but actually trust means continuous. How do you continuously keep that up to date? Right.
I'll extend this a little bit, and I'll go back to our earlier comments and observations that the coding agents today are easily on the cutting edge of how we do things well with AI. And even there, it's worth observing that the best coding agents that we've got are tool users, both tool builders and tool users, right? None of the frontier models are trusted with editing files directly. They all work with tools to edit a file. How simple could it be? Like, just change this line in the file. We know that they, even today, are not going to be relied to, you cannot hand over the entire file and say, hey, just change this one part, and reliably get back a coherent answer, like that the file is still syntactically correct, small mistakes still might happen. So they operate through tools. Tooling ends up being one of the trust layers in coding agents, that you now kind of let the AI reason about what should happen, but then they kind of hand off to okay, for actually executing it, hand that off to some tooling. That happens in the coding agents with okay, let me search through files, let me edit files, let me work with our version control. There's echoes of that within all enterprises today. We already have tools that we reliably can use for ourselves. And the best kind of trust we can have is say, okay, first, let's box in the AI so that by the time action happens, its choices have been narrowed. And then those choices end up being, okay, don't go do that choice. Now use a tool that we know and trust will do the thing predictably, repeatably, every single time, right? So there's kind of a funnel from like, let the AI have great reasoning abilities, and then stage by stage, narrow down to like, by the time action happens, where things really matter and like you need that trust, you've boxed it in so that the possibility of it doing something crazy basically has been reduced. And then also like the actual doing the action, the AI is not going to perform the action, it's going to happen through a tool that you can then control in the standard way we already do control.
Cool. Yeah, we have a few audience questions.
Sure.
How would you implement agentic AI in a financially regulated environment? I think that speaks to your point, especially to enhance business process efficiency.
That's a great question. So, I mean, if I look at an agentic AI loop, right? It's perception, it's about planning, it's about acting, and then it's about reasoning, right? So this is how you create that loop. Now, let's start with perception itself. So this is where, I'm sure we've all heard of RAG. Show of hands, how many of you have heard of RAG? Okay. I think the world's moving towards RAP, which is retrieval augmented perception. Okay, this is not generation, because you want your agent to perceive where the current state is, right? So in a financial system, for example, you're doing KYC, right, or KYB, right, know your business to onboard a new customer. You need to understand, one, what is the current state of things? Two is, how do you plan what should be the next set of actions and tools, right? And the most important thing in a financial regulated industry is to have that trust layer. So ensuring you're not just looking at governmental regulations, but each company has their own regulations. How do you distill those regulations into something that can be verified becomes very, very important. The decisions that every agent is making needs to be audited, needs to be, first of all, logged, and then audited, and measured, saying that did the agent make the right decision? And if it did not, catch it early. Otherwise, this is going to go at scale, right? One mistake in one specific agent is just going to scale to many other things, many other decisions that happen. So having that trust boundary becomes very, very important.
I love that, and if I can, extend that a little bit, like this trust boundary is something that, like for like humans, when you hire a new employee, think about like what you would do with them for actually bringing them onto the job, how they can then make good decisions when you let them go on their own. We don't micromanage, hopefully, everybody every single moment of the day, right? It's the same thing with agents. Right now, like you can just give your best shot at like describing what they should do, put them in an environment, have even guardrails in place, but you need to evaluate a probationary period. You evaluate, hey, here's some hypotheticals, what are you going to do? Yeah. See that they do the right thing, let them improve over time so that they learn basically, here's what I decided in the circumstance previously, and that was approved. I'm going to do that again, because that seems like a safe thing to do. So like they have memory that accumulates the same way that we would. Make that available to agents so that in addition to having the guardrails in place, that the guardrails are not just a one-shot for them, that the guardrails are there to help tune what they're actually doing, so that the more they do the work, the better they're going to be at it. Right? So that's not just a one-shot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there is another question, like how can we close the gap between academia and industry? Like, what resources are currently available and what should be available, right? Anything you'd like to?
Between academia
and industry, yeah.
Wow. So do you have any thoughts on that immediately, or?
I'll take your lead on this.
So I mean, there's so many different dimensions of like the split there. On the one hand, like academia is where so much of AI is happening, right? Like if you pay attention to like what's happening out at Y Combinator out in the valley, like the new startups that are coming up that are going to disrupt new industries, they're all of course AI based, and almost reliably, every single one of them are either recent graduates from Stanford or pick a university, or there will have been a research paper published 6 months, 9 months earlier that is the kernel of the idea that they're taking advantage of, right? So kind of unusually within AI, that part of academia is ahead of industry. That the future is being written down and submitted in research papers, that if you read the research papers, you might find a gem and be like, actually, this is exactly what I need. I'm going to productize that and turn that into business. So that in some ways, industry is actually lagging behind academia. On the flip side, and this is really at the scale of them, academia is limited by their budget and like what they can actually do for training new models and like, actually staying at the forefront. And so industry is well ahead in actually building the models. So there's a bit of a, like, you can take it either way. It depends on like what aspect between the, what gap you're actually pointing at. Do you think that's right?
Absolutely. And I just feel from an experimentation standpoint, right? So you have the ability to run experiments at scale at this point of time, right? So with the ideas that academia is coming out with, you have the ability to read them, understand them, and also make sense and run experiments on top of them. So I feel that's where you have the ability to marry both academia and create an industry out of it as well. Yeah.
Right. From my standpoint, we have a plan here to collaborate with the universities in this region to actually launch some like boot camps, a couple of day boot camps to help bridge that skills gap.
Yeah.
Right? And before we close it out, like gentlemen, just a couple of things. One is as a follow-on to this conversation, there is a CIO guide. Literally, it's a follow-on to this conversation, a 40-page high-level guide that you can scan the QR code and you can download that. And then we also created something called as a Certify Your AI Agent. People do wipe coding. People are building agents. The concern is it safe enough? Is it reliable enough? The questions. So all you have to do is like go to that URL, scan the QR code, point to your agent. It will give you a certificate of authenticity and accuracy and safety. And it will point out where the gaps are. And it will give you a validated certificate for 90 days. And if you want like redo it, I can do it again. So like two things we created. One is a guide for you, and one is a Certify Your AI Agent. Play with that, download the guide, take it home. And we also have like two gentlemen here, like from Secure Cyber Connect. If you have any questions, like definitely connect with the two gentlemen here, Warren and Jay. That's pretty much for now. Any other questions from audience here? Like we would be happy to take. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Swati and I come from a financial background. So you have been talking about context engineering, RAG, RAP, all good. But when we implement an AI, most of the time the business value, how would you really quantify if the business value is just about reducing the friction, not by some gains? How would you justify that?
So in my experience, when I look at implementing agentic AI for reimagining a business process, business leaders are looking at the holy trinity, right? Increase the throughput of that business process, reduce the average handle time, okay, and also reduce the error rates. Okay, so it's hard to get all three together, but with agentic AI, it is possible once you have the trust boundaries established. So it is a step-by-step approach, right? So one is to assess your existing business process in the financial domain, and how do you reimagine? When you talk about reimagination itself, it's about creating job descriptions for those agents. What exactly are those agents going to do? How are they going to organize themselves? So that becomes your organizational hierarchy. And the last thing is also how are you going to measure them, appraise them? So think of organizational design to actually reimagine a business process. And I've seen that being successful in many of our financial services customers.
You just talked about this, trust boundaries and stuff, and creating the agentic AI on base of that.
Yeah.
Who takes the? Again, they are just an agents that me and you have created it.
Yeah.
By law, who takes the onus if something goes wrong? Is it the agent? Is it you, me, or?
It is the company, right? So
But
that's.
we are actually using this LLMs, and most of the time companies are using it from the outside, Anthropic, OpenAI, and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So do you think it would be if I use that as just a service,
Yeah.
do you think I would take as a responsibility, or what
I
it
think
should be?
it is typically your responsibility because you've used that, and it is your trust boundary that you're trying to establish here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is where the Certify Your AI Agent would come
Absolutely.
into place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. I think before we wrap up, like one more question I think that we could take. Yeah. Sure.
Hello. So when you're talking about agents, they're all essentially running on the same LLMs, just with different context. Would it not be better to have a fleet of more finely tuned, domain-specific language models that are achieving tasks? Would there not be a bit of a trade-off where you're getting less hallucination, faster inference, and you don't have to retrain one massive model? You could just retrain these smaller, more granular models.
Yeah. I mean, we've had chats about this, together, and I absolutely agree with you. I think if you're early days in doing stuff, then use the most expensive model that you've got budget for, and just get the system working, right? It's the classic, just get it working first, but then when you head towards production, then you start facing okay, is the agent actually doing well enough? Is the LLM, need to be fine-tuned or not? Do I need to switch to a different model? That immediately ends up hitting you when you go to production. With development time, one person doing the work, that's fine. If you're going to scale it to 1,000 deployments of the agent, cost becomes a real thing. Smaller models that are fine-tuned becomes reasonable. And I'll go back to my earlier point. There will also be parts of the agentic workflow that you realize, actually, we can just do that with normal software. We don't need an agent to be doing this part of it. I don't need an agent to count to 10. I can do that in a loop, right? There's aspects of that in all workflows. So trying to find the right balance of when you need a general model that's super smart to specialized models that only do one thing. I absolutely agree with you. I think there's kind of many shades to this. Do you think that's true?
Plus one. So I again go back to the entire agentic loop, right? When you're trying to plan and perceive, you may need a big model, but to act and to do the reasoning for those things, right, you may need a smaller model. So each agent may have a different model, and this is what I see a lot of customers use, right? So it's important to measure how effective your agents are. That's when you can determine whether it makes sense to go with an SLM or go with a large model itself.
And just to add to what both gentlemen said, is there is a fundamental assumption in your argument that agent is like LLM with context, and that's true. Okay, but it's way more than that. In a real-world environments, agents can become much complex than that. For example, I give this simple analogy, right? What is an LLM? LLM, imagine it's your brain. Okay, it's the brain of the system. Okay, but for a human to operate, it's way more than a brain. Brain is a critical piece, but brain alone doesn't do everything. You have nervous system, you have hands and legs, and how everything coordinates together with the external systems and internal systems. So integrations, tools, context, everything plays into picture when you talk about an agent and the agent interactions. So I think so it's true that an agent is a context with LLMs, but it's way more than that as well.
Yeah. On that note, I have a book recommendation, right? It's called A Brief History of Intelligence.
Oh yeah.
Okay. It's by Max Bennett. It is a great book which talks about how intelligence evolved, from nematodes to humans. And I think we are at day one of the agentic journey, and it gives us a lot of context about how we're going to evolve as well with agents.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen, and thanks for your time this morning. You have a wonderful day. And if you want to connect, we'll be here around, and then you can actually talk more. And if you have any other questions, we are happy to take. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.